All right, it's good to have everybody here this morning. We'll get started. Needless to say, there's going to be a graduation party out there. So, which is something we've been dealing with all weekends. We've been looking at some texts in Mark and then a few other things. We're going back to Mark 15, though we're going to also go between Mark 15 and Psalm 22, and I also put Matthew up there, so we'll be talking a little bit about that. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you for the graduates. We ask that you'll be with them and their future endeavors, that you'll bless them and their families. We're thankful, Father, for your love for us. We're thankful for those who serve our country, and we ask you to watch over them as well. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. We have a text in Mark, Matthew and Mark. They both say the same thing. Jesus is on the cross about 3 in the afternoon. He cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's the red on both sides there. And it comes from Psalm 22. I have, and others have, looked at that and said, well, God forsook Jesus and built whole sermons and whole discussions on that. But I read an article probably a dozen years or so ago, and I've taken another look at it, and I've kind of said, maybe that's not the case. Over in John chapter 16, he is talking to his disciples right at the end. He says, "A time is coming," this is verse 32, "time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me." And some texts say he is always with me. So, what does this psalm or this saying from the cross have to do with what's going on? And I've looked at it and tried to figure out to really understand what's going on, and I've put other things here because throughout, on both sides of the saying, we find verses from Psalm 22, and we're going to read them and look at them. And this week, in one of my 2 o'clock morning sessions that I have with my mind while I'm laying in bed trying to go back to sleep, it hit me that Mark and Matthew have, after the event, obviously, and they're writing this down, realize the importance of going back and looking both at the event and at the psalm, and have come up with the idea, why, or at least expressed an idea, why Jesus would say this. Some scholars have suggested over the years that when a Jewish person said a psalm, which is a songbook or a text, oftentimes they would just pick what was most important, but that didn't mean you ignored the context of it. And they didn't have chapters and verses. So it was like having a songbook with no, you go to, we would say song number 40 or whatever song, 728B, we all know that one. But they didn't have that, so they would say or quote an important verse or even the first verse, which is what this is. And it was incumbent upon the people listening to go back and remember the song or go think about the context or find out about the context where they read it, or whether the rabbis or the whoever were the leaders would explain it to them, and then they could understand what's going on. So it wasn't just merely quoting a verse and then, like we've often done, and build a whole case of whatever on it. And so I think sometimes when we think about Jesus being forsaken, we may be missing the point that he wasn't forsaken in the sense that God just completely left him. Again, John 16 gives us a different impression that the Father is always with him. So what is he saying here? So let's, and we'll just use Mark, though you can look at, again, a couple of different quotes from a couple of different verses from Psalms. If I did it right and got the right verse for the right verse in comparison, there's about 7 or 8 different 8 quotations at least, if not more. And again, they surround the key text of Mark where he says, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" So what did David have in mind, and what's going on there? So the first one from Mark is verse 24. That's sort of where it starts. He says, "And they crucified him, dividing his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get." And Marty's going to read verse 18 from Psalm 22.
"As they divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing."
Verse 27 in Mark, "They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on the right, one on the left." And that's 16.
"The dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men has encircled me. They've pierced my hands and my feet."
So you kind of start to see how Mark and Matthew are building this case for there's more going on than just simply God saying or Jesus saying God has abandoned me. I think he's pointing people, and Mark and Matthew have picked it up, to what's happening in the psalm that relates to him. And then we're going to look at the psalm in a little bit to explain that. Verse 31 of Mark, he says, "In the same way the chief priests and teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, but he can't save himself." Verses 7 and 8.
"All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him."
And then in Mark 15:32, "Let the Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Those crucified with him also heaped themselves on him." And read verse 6.
"But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people."
Again, the idea of heaping insults. Verse 34, obviously, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" which is Psalm 22:1. We don't need to read that because it's the exact same quotation. Verse 35 in Mark, "When some of those standing near heard this, they said, 'Listen, he's calling Elijah.' And then they ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on the staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. 'Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down,' they said." And that's 2022.
"Deliver my life from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lions. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will declare your name to my brothers in the congregation. I will praise you."
Okay. And again, why the verse, sometimes they're not similar, but sort of a reference or an allusion to what's being done. Verse 39 of Mark, "And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, 'Surely this is this man was the Son of God.'" Verse 29.
"All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive."
And then the last one will be 16:6, which kind of goes a little further. "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him, but go tell his disciples." And goes on from there. So that's 28 through 32.
I should have chosen 31 verses.
Or whatever, 31. I told you if I had it right.
"For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness to the people yet unborn. He has done.
So it's almost as if Mark and Matthew are saying, here's the gospel. Here's the message from the crucifixion to the resurrection. Now, they don't explain the meaning necessarily of the crucifixion and resurrection, though we probably could find some ideas in Psalm 22. But they are saying, here's the good news. God has not forsaken us. And as we start to read through it, one of the things we can learn from Psalm 22, things aren't the way they appear to be. And that's probably something that's difficult for us to understand. We look at something and we say, well, this sure looks like, or this is the way it is. But in reality, things aren't necessarily the way they look. It may look bad or it may look upsetting. Did God really forsake Jesus? Is that really what's going on here?
He didn't forsake his son.
I'm sorry?
He did not forsake Jesus.
Right.
It was the sin that was before him. He was carrying the weight of sin.
Right.
And God cannot look upon sin. And the flesh cried out to him, asked him, Father, have thou forsaken me? But he didn't forsake the son. He forsaken sin.
Okay.
But there's also the irony that Jesus is God and come to earth as a man. And God gave up certain abilities and characteristics when he came to earth. He even concealed things from himself. He said, I don't even know when the end times are coming.
Right.
God hasn't revealed it to me. Well, I mean, if you could have brought that with you from heaven, but you didn't. So there's also that frustration with us as we hear him. Jesus is God, come to earth as a man, but he's also man, 100% man, and it's a great mystery.
Right, and that's probably some of the difficulty we have with the text that we're looking at here. You know, how do you separate the two, or if that's necessary? And so, but anyway, let's read through some of the Psalms now. Some of Psalm 22, verse 2. My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer; by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. In you, our ancestors put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cry out, and were saved. In you they trusted, and were put to shame. So David cries out, reminds oftentimes of God's deliverance. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind. Deliverance is involved in this. That is a typical way of the Psalms and the prophets. They cry out, they remember what God has done in the past. Psalm 78 is quite a long one. Psalm 10 something or other, 104, 105, 106, one of them goes through Israel's history. We did this, but does this but thing. They missed it here, and then he goes back again and go through another part, and then they missed it there. But he goes through there. It's a reminder of what they were, or who they were, what they went through, and it's a call to that. Go ahead. Somebody? Oh, I thought somebody said question. I also am old and hear things now. Verse 6, which we quoted already, but I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. Now remember, this is David saying this. So this is how David sees things. And we think of David, of course, as a man of faith, and we don't have a context as to when this was done. But you think, was it done while he was being chased through the wilderness by Saul? Was it done while he was king before Bathsheba? Was it done after Bathsheba? We don't have an idea of where that is, or where this psalm comes from, but this is how David sees things. And so just have to focus on something that's relatively negative in David's life at the moment, going through this difficulty. He trusts in the Lord, they say, let the Lord rescue him, let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought, now here he then turns and says, you brought me out of the womb, you made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. So there is an appeal. Why? He's appealing to God. So if you're going to appeal, isn't there an expectation of a response? And that's some of the idea. Go ahead.
That kind of reminds me of the conversation Job had with God.
Right. Yeah, and his was up and down.
Yeah.
And if you read through Job's speeches, we have to kind of, is he talking about himself or is he talking to God about what God will do? And it's just, it's like one part of the speech is one thing and then it switches in the same speech. They're usually 2 chapters long, so he switches it and you go, oh, what's he getting at? But isn't that the human way? You know, one moment we're up and the next moment we're bouncing off the wall trying to figure out what's going on. Or we're down one moment and people go, ooh, it's just that we're struggling with something and we just bounce. That's the only way I can explain it. Bounce back off the walls, trying to figure out where we are to kind of bring us back into focus or back into a direction. And so I think we see this in Jesus as well. He's on the cross and he's got, at this moment, going through this struggle. But it's also Matthew and Mark are looking at it and saying, now let's look at this whole text before we make any firm ideas about what the meaning of the saying, my God, why have you forsaken me is. There's more going on there. And they're bouncing, they are, the two of them, looking at ideas that come from the psalm. All right, where are we now? Verse 11, or verse 12, many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me, roaring lions that tear their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I'm poured out like water, and all my all my bones are out of joint, which is typical of crucifixion, but you walk in the desert. Doesn't it feel that way? That you're, the heat and all, you feel like everything is, you told me that you were, when you got home, you're just hurt all over from the...
That combination, heat, dehydration.
So, and it would be the same thing with a person who's being chased, trying to get some rest somewhere along the way. Psalm 40, as the deer pants for water, so my soul longs after you. And you look at that text, it's not just a deer looking for water, it's a deer that's being chased and desiring the water, and wanting just to get a sip to get some strength to keep on going. The whatever wild animal or whoever's chasing him. And I think sometimes we get into that situation in a spiritual sense, that we're being worn down and we're hurting. And if we hurt spiritually, we can also hurt physically in the process of doing that.
And plus, David also felt like he was alone. He was all by himself. He had
I'm
nobody else.
I'm going to move over so I can see you, so you don't have to bend over.
It's that he felt as though he was going through this all by himself, alone.
Yeah.
And why is these things happening?
And that's the way it is sometimes. I'm the only one that's going through this, and we don't think of, well, others can be. It's you go to and again, bring up me, spend 6 days in the hospital. I didn't feel I was that sick to spend 6 days in the hospital. And then look around, there are others that were in worse shape than I was. I was sort of, why am I here type of thing. But other people are just really struggling with it. And so, yeah, this being chased, this pressure, this all this weight put on one's shoulders as they're struggling through life. And sometimes we forget that we're not in it alone, but it appears to be alone. And maybe we focus in on ourselves and say, nobody knows what I'm going through. I think of all these, being a Memorial Day weekend, you think of all the servicemen who are, you see these advertisements on TV, they're wheelchairs or they're missing arms and legs and they're moving around. They seem to be doing well, their families with them, but they have to have special houses, special ways, things to reach, so they can be able to cook for themselves and have more freedom. And we think, well, man, they got through it, but we don't know their struggle. They don't tell us their struggle to get there. How many surgeries they had, how long they spent in the hospital. There's one guy that they started off with, it's been several years now, he had a brain injury. And the last time, it looked like, you wonder if he was ever going to really just be able to do anything. And now he's able to it's not easy to walk a little bit. He's got a special cane on one side, and he's able to take a step and then move the cane, and which is a far greater improvement. And his speech is coming along very well. But that's taken years to get to that point. And you're amazed at the ability of the human body, and yet we also have to realize the terrible struggle that one goes through. So we see this, I think, in David and in others, and even in ourselves in some ways. We say, well, I'm not that bad. If you're hurting, no matter what it is, it could be a real struggle in your life. Feel free to speak up, by the way. My heart has turned to wax, verse 14. It is melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Around here, when there's no humidity or dry, it's we all know how that sticking to the tongue sticking to the roof of the mouth. The opposite, of course, is you sweat yourself, and then you're so exhausted. I just did a little weed eating in the backyard yesterday, and I came inside and sat down and said, sweating, and trying just to get some strength back. I had a couple other things to do, so we know what it's like to get beat down here. When I was younger, that didn't bother me. So anyway, that's also the frustrating part. When you get old, things you can't do as long as you used to. 16 dogs surround me, packs of villains encircle me, literally or figuratively. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. So again, both a picture of crucifixion, but you have to wonder what David's thinking about or going through when he sees himself surrounded. And was it when he was in Gath, I think it is, and where he feigned that he was crazy? Was this a time frame where people may have been taking things from him just because he couldn't, he had to have some place of safety? Then in 19 he says, but you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lions. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen. Let me read. 22, I will declare your name to my people. In the assembly, I will praise you. So, again, calling out for delivery, and then being delivered, or here's what he will do after he's delivered, and that brings about the praise. And then 23, you will fear the Lord, you who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him. Revere him, all you descendants of Israel. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. So in the beginning, where are you, to he hears me. So there's a realization after going through all this struggle, God is listening. And it goes, again, going back to Job, same thing. Job goes through all the things. I want to talk to God. I want to question him in a law court. I want to ask him why these things and this thing. And his comment in doing that, he's not going to come answer me. And then God comes and answers him. But first, God says, let me question you. And he gives them some questions, and Job realizes then he never does get an answer. And we don't even think does he know even what happened in chapters 1 and 2. We read, because we have chapters 1 and 2, we read Job. But if you don't read the first 2 chapters and just start in chapter 3, then you're looking at a person, wait a minute, why is he going through all this? Why isn't God answering him? I have those questions. So those are the struggles, but God answers
God
them.
did answer Job. He told him he didn't have to give him an answer. When
Well, right.
You're not worthy of me giving you this answer because were you there?
Yeah.
I placed you in
Yeah.
He answered him.
Well, yeah, in that sense, yeah, he answered him. It's the struggle to get there that he went through. And David has that same type of struggle. This is a briefer view of Job, with David asking those same questions. And so he has listened to his cry for help and appealed to him. Then in verse 25, from you comes the theme of my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow down before him, which brings these end verses, 16:6 and 28:5, and you can go all the way to the end of the chapter, that go out in all the world and preach the gospel, or proclaim the gospel, make disciples of all nations type of thing. So in the psalm, he kind of gives that impression there, little hints here and there, even Isaiah 2, and go through a number of other texts which don't come to mind right now, but there are a number of texts that talk about the nations, about going out into the world. I think Isaiah 49 is the other one I'm thinking of. So all the families of the nations will bow down before him. The message is out for all to go out in all the world. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him, those who cannot keep themselves alive. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to the people yet unborn, he has done it. And the going down to the grave comes back to that Matthew 27, 51, 52, 53 that we looked at last week. The saints, after Jesus died, the curtains torn in two, and then the saints came out of the tombs. They're kind of an indication, even here, with that little idea there thrown out in David's time. David didn't have any of the prophets that did miracles. The miracles or the responses of God to David were deliverance, but I don't think he declares any of them a miracle of some type or a sign there may be a sign, but he does, his prayers are answered. He prays and asks God, should I do this? And God says yes or no. And so David didn't have like Moses, or he didn't have Elijah or Elijah. These were not things done in David's day. So it's kind of an interesting idea that's being expressed here with David. There's things that are going to happen that he can think about or say, and again, we have inspiration, Spirit moving him. But experience-wise, not so much. You think about the baby born dies, I can go be with him, but he can't be with me. Well, no idea of resurrection. And yet, here in this text, he gets a little hint there of something going on. So there are things that are thrown in and thrown out along the way. So I think the comparison there is interesting. Before we make hard decisions or ideas out of Psalm 22:1, my God, why have you forsaken me? To realize there's a lot going on in the text that are involved in looking at the psalm. Both Matthew and Mark spend time trying to understand what's happening in David's day and applying it to Jesus, or that they reflect upon Jesus' statement and said, let's go back and look at the song and see what's happening and how this relates to what we've just gone through, or what we see in this event that they witnessed, at least if we, Matthew and probably Mark in some way. We talked about that earlier, about Mark may have been a disciple involved in seeing things, even though he wasn't an apostle. And he writes it down. So any comments anybody likes to make on anything in the last 4 weeks?
When David was going through his little pity party, he was having a pity party.
Right.
Really going through his frustration, crying out his problems. And then the fear probably set inside of him that he said, well, I'm complaining so much. Let me turn this around and start praising God for all the blessings that he has.
It's typical of the Psalms that the laments, you cry out and make your complaint, and then you turn and say, now I'm going to praise God. The exception would be Psalm 88, which is a lament, but no praise. Unless you read Psalm 89, some people connect those two. Here we have Psalm 22, and some people are looking to say, does Psalm 23 relate to Psalm 22? Because we see Psalm 23, if we say it at funerals, in more of the high churches, they quote the psalm as part of the assembly. But here, in that, he talks about being led to quiet waters. He talks about God being the shepherd, and I'll fear no evil. And then he says, even though I walk through the darkest valleys, or the valley of the shadow of death, or the deepest darkness, however translation you want to use, things are bad in the dark valleys. They're difficult. Our kids were up. 2 of our kids were up in Colorado, driving in the mountains last night. I'm thinking, those roads are going to be dark, because there isn't any light out there. Once the sun goes, I'm thinking, I'm watching them where they are, and I'm thinking the sun just keeps moving, and it's getting darker. And if you've been in a mountain area when it's dark, it's really dark, and it's kind of spooky as well. So areas that don't have the electricity and things like that.
It's beautiful because you can see the night sky.
Sure, that's the amazing thing, is you look up, which is maybe a hint, but still, but in the surroundings around you. Yeah, look up, the stars are great. That's what.
I was amazed when I saw the band of the Milky Way for the first time. Wow.
Yeah, just being the first time I looked through a telescope, couldn't. The guy's trying to explain to me, you can see this and that, and I'm thinking, all I see is 10 billion stars. I don't know how you can make a distinction between any of them, but and it's interesting. When we were in Jordan at Petra at night, we were watching. They have a little show at the down in the where the treasury is, but that you can look up in the sky, and you look up, and I hadn't seen the Big Dipper in years. And I looked up and said, "Oh, Big Dipper, yay!" So along with a host of other stars. So it's getting away from the light reflection and all that we often see. It's pretty cool to go out and look at things in a different way and enjoy that. Just don't get out far enough here in Houston.
Most of you probably heard this before, but there was some discussion about how these missionaries who would be down in the Amazon, they'd be in canoes with the guy behind them, in the middle of the night. I mean, pitch black, you couldn't see anything. And the guy was staying in the middle of the river, and somebody looks back there and they notice he's doing this, he can see the shape of the trees on either side, and he can see the stars. He's just staying between the trees, and he knows his way.
Yeah.
You don't always have to look there.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
The obvious metaphor is look up.
Look up. Yeah, that's.
That's like Conroe. When it get dark out in Conroe, you can pass up all your stops.
And then the end of Psalm 23, you prepare a table before my enemies, you anoint me with oil, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So maybe Psalm 23 is a carryover, or at least follows because of Psalm 22, that here's where we're headed type of thing. All right, any comments in it?
Kind of interested about the crowd that was around Jesus when he was crucified, and in verse 34 it says, it's the Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why did you forsake me? But those that were around him said, oh, he's calling Elijah. So I'm guessing Eloi and Elijah probably sound the same,
Right.
Whatever it was, but it just seems interesting that, in the translation we have, it goes back to Psalm 22, which, says, which means my God,
Mm-hmm.
People, the crowd around, heard Elijah instead of my God. So that's,
That's what hit them. And so they didn't go back to Psalm 22. They went to the prophets, which would be, if I can get my figure, about 200 years later. Get my thinking of that part up, my adding up. So yeah, it's an interesting response where why would they appeal to Elijah? Now he was a great prophet, and Moses and Elijah appeared in the Transfiguration, and a lot of people kind of focus on. a lot of Jewish scholars focus on Elijah. We understand that they were expecting a prophet like Moses, but Elijah was also. Are you, John the Baptist? Are you Elijah? So somehow he plays a role in that. I'll have to look more into that. But it's interesting, right, that they only focus on that. And Matthew and Mark kind of, wait a minute, there's more to this.
Yeah.
It's not exactly what he had in mind.
And if he went through his little pity party too, when he was in the cave. He went
Yeah,
through
that's right.
stage.
Yeah, he went out there and had a,
He had a meltdown.
I'm the only one left. So he would.
Just a crowd's response too. So they go get something for him to drink, try and keep him alive a little bit longer. I'm suspecting.
Yeah.
Go to see if Elijah is down
Yeah. Well,
rescue.
it was if it wasn't for being the Passover in a particular and the Sabbath and all coming, they would have let him. They would have spent 3 or 4 days. That's why they broke the legs of the thieves. So it was and a surprise Pilate that Jesus had already died. So here, we'll give you something to drink. We'll keep your suffering prolonged here. Maybe you'll say something more. And of course, there's only 7 sayings, and so they're all interesting. But the last would be either "He is finished," or "It is finished," or "My God, into your hands I commend my spirit." So.
And the vinegar was intentional. It's bitter, and it wakes you up. It's almost like smelling salts today.
No.
So it's not that they were trying to be mean to him by offering him vinegar, but it was something to wake you up.
Why would you want to wake somebody up?
Well, to see if Elijah does come.
Oh, okay. Well, they did, yeah. I'm not sure that's being kind to a person.
Well, it sounds bad to us, but that was kind of just a really weakened down wine.
Yeah.
I think that's what soldiers would drink.
Yeah.
Didn't they call it wine vinegar?
Could be.
I always wondered about that. Why would they give him vinegar? I'd give him water or something. Is that why?
Well, water was not the best thing to give anybody.
Even well people didn't drink that.
Yeah, the water was it wasn't the crystal clear stuff that we think of today, or even in the 1800s when you're out here in the West, you could go to the mountain stream and drink something. Water there was pretty stagnant, pretty bad. And
From cisterns that were.
yeah, the cisterns and all, you get green. My brother-in-law has a pond in the front of his house, down a hill in front of his house, and his stuff washes down from another pond, and it's just green stuff. He can't get rid of it. He tries and tries to get rid of this. So it's just kind of, you can, I'll take it. Sounds like, that's why. Salt, is it salt tablets or, I forget what type of tablets they use for, what type of tablets they use for water purifying.
Just chlorine usually.
Yeah. Yeah, we survived Camille. When I was in the service, we survived Camille, and first thing they told us, get some Clorox, just put a little drop in your water so you can drink. Great work. Yeah, this was way back. So it's an exciting thing.
That didn't clear it up, that just
Kills whatever's in there and makes your stomach feel really good.
It gives you something to chew on.
Yeah.
Verse 42 of Mark, this is totally off subject so far, but it is in Mark.
Okay, yeah, it's in there.
Was a preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. We often equate the Sabbath day as the day of worship. It wasn't the day of worship, the day of preparation before the Sabbath.
Mhm.
It was preparation before the Sabbath. That's the day they worship. And so it's interesting that that's probably the only place in the scripture where they distinguish between the Sabbath, the day of rest.
Yeah.
You can't walk to the synagogue or to the temple because that would,
Right.
and so it was a day of preparation. We don't usually talk about the day of preparation, but that in the Jewish calendar was the day of worship. It would be, I guess, what we would call Friday today.
Yeah.
And by the way, they still worship on Friday. So.
Yeah, good, that's what makes the whole crucifixion thing interesting, because the Pharisees wanted Jesus' body off the cross before the end of the day, because they didn't want it on the Sabbath. So, because we want to honor the Sabbath, that's important to us. It's okay that we can have a kangaroo court and kill someone, and lie about them and want them dead, but we want to honor the Sabbath. What? Now we never see that today. So we.
Also, like several years ago, I saw on television where a little country minister of some church, fortunately it wasn't a Church of Christ, but he was accused of murdering his wife. And this is a ministry. And so when the detective was interviewing him, he said, well, you didn't like her, why didn't you just divorce her? And he said, you don't understand, we don't believe in divorce. And the detective, he didn't say anything, but the look said it all. Okay, you don't believe in divorce, but you believe in murder? What are you talking about? It was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Hopefully that's just a humorous thing and not a not a reality.
I don't know, but that's what he said.
Oh, I know. I
I
mean,
don't understand. You don't believe in divorce.
it's interesting how things can get us into twisted in some ways. One thing and not thinking things through. Well, murder's okay, but divorce isn't.
That's why Jesus said, leave everything behind.
So.
He's not just talking about yourself. He's talking about the stuff that you learned
Yeah.
that you're indoctrinated with.
It's interesting sometimes the things we get ourselves into. But again, the Sabbath, and we see that work out because Jesus was taken to the tomb, and then nobody did anything on that Saturday, on the Sabbath day. They had it, and it makes for, we then understand the apostles are all hiding, but they're stuck. So, but nobody's looking for them. The Romans don't care, and the Jew. Well, this is the Sabbath. We can't go out and look for them. So they're kind of, we get out of town maybe as soon as we can, type of thing. And always interesting. Well, so just looking at these texts, what the little odds and ends that Mark picks out that seem to suggest Mark was a disciple. Remember, Acts chapter 1, there are 120 of them have gathered together, choosing a new apostle, and it had to be from the baptism of John to the resurrection. So they chose two. Let's assume there may have been more, and Mark may have been in that group. And so, but they picked these other two, and then they chose one of them. But Mark writes things down again. You tie a donkey to a doorpost. The tomb, the rock by the tomb was very large. The grass was green. Well, we read over those. We know grass was green, but he puts that in there as if to say there's a little bit more I want to add to the story. Jesus was intending to pass us by. What do you mean he's intending to pass, walking on the water? What do you mean he was intending to pass us by? You weren't going to stop and help us? What does that have to do? But he adds that little detail in there. So he adds these little, he was with the wild animals during the temptation. So there's just little details that may suggest that Mark is spending a little more time in these things because he may have been, and just a suggestion, an eyewitness to what was happening and wrote it down. I don't know if anybody else thinks that, so I may be a very weird person. Well, I know. You are a very weird person, so we'll just leave it at that, and I may be the only person who thinks this way. So, anyway, that's one suggestion. I also think that both Matthew and Mark spend time on on Psalm 22 because there's more involved in that than just Jesus being forsaken or his cry from the cross. That there's things that are happening that they wanted to express, and to make this quote then causes one to go back and look at he was surrounded, or they did gamble for his clothes, and the different things that were happening there, even going down to the gospel going out in all the world. All right, well, and unless you have a closing comment or two, there's still donuts out there. Thank you for coming to class. I think starting next week we meet one class out there.